Tánaiste, apparently you're very concerned about the Chief of Staff meeting with the Russian ambassador. I wonder, would you be as concerned if he met with the US ambassador or the head of NATO? And I say that because I'm concerned that you attended a conference, maybe you can confirm this, in Brest in France this month with EU foreign ministers, where you discussed the further project of militarising Europe and integrating with NATO.
Minister to respond. Minister to respond. Minister.
Deputy, I recently attended an informal, what's called Gymnich meeting of EU foreign ministers in Brest on the 13th and 14th of January. On the 14th, we were joined by fellow EU defence ministers to discuss the EU common security and defence policy, and more specifically the strategic compass, which I addressed earlier when you weren't in the chamber, on which I've given an update to the House today. The strategic compass does provide for greater work in the area of capability development, as well as further investment in innovative technologies. From the Irish perspective, we consider effective capabilities as key to an effective CSDP. In practical terms, the strengthening of our capabilities will help improve the EU's ability to undertake peacekeeping and crisis management tasks, as outlined in the Treaty of the European Union. Of course, different member states bring different perspectives to bear in relation to discussions on security and defence. Ireland's position continues to be recognised by our fellow member states, and we remain clear that our active participation in CSDP does not prejudice the specific character of our security and defence policy or our obligations. Within the EU, defence and security are a national competence, and this includes national spending on defence and security. This means that any decision, including any deepening of EU cooperation, any increase to national spending on defence and security, or strengthening of the EU as a defence sector, will require unanimity. For us, any new proposals in this regard will also have to be in accordance with Ireland's policy of military neutrality.
Minister, this country is supposed to be neutral. That's frankly laughable when you consider we've allowed Shannon Airport to be used again and again by the US military to prosecute brutal, murderous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. What I want to know is, what does neutrality mean when you go to a conference in Brest where we are discussing the French project, among others, a major European powers project to increase the militarisation of the European Union, their absolutely sort of open call for the establishment of a European army, and where NATO are calling on the EU to increase military expenditure at the same time that NATO is expanding towards Russia in a way that has now assisted, and don't get me wrong, the Russians should be condemned for massing troops in Ukraine, for having exercises off our waters, but where NATO is doing exactly the same thing, is ratcheting it up, and the EU are discussing more military expenditure. Where's the voice of neutrality in saying we should be stepping back from this? We shouldn't be spending more on arms. Are you saying that?
Well, can I just say that while we are militarily neutral as a country, we've always supported efforts to improve the effectiveness of the EU's common security and defence policy. Indeed, successive governments have not viewed Ireland's policy of neutrality as meaning that the country should stand aside and not get involved in peacekeeping or stability in other parts of the world. Rather, they have considered that neutrality enhances Ireland's reputation internationally and enables more effective engagement in efforts to promote peace and security. And that's exactly the approach that we're bringing now to these discussions on the strategic compass and the future of defence and security issues. And we will continue to advocate on that. We're not the only militarily neutral country, by the way, in the European Union. There are others too: Malta, Austria, Sweden, Finland. We bring a perspective to these debates that I think Irish people expect me to bring, which is one that's focused on peacekeeping, cooperation with the UN, and peace and security around the world.
It's a very strange definition of neutral, right? I mean, today or yesterday, you expressed concern because the Chief of Staff meets the Russian ambassador. Now, to me, neutral would mean you'd express similar concern if you met the US ambassador or the head of NATO, or the fact that leading powers inside the European Union are looking for, and have achieved indeed, closer integration with NATO when NATO is a nuclear military alliance. It's not some sort of benign body. It is the outworking of Western, US-led expansion towards Russia, which is now provoking an escalation in Ukraine, a dangerous escalation. Now, to me, the voice of neutrality against that background is to say you don't pour petrol on a fire by arming up, by spending more on weapons, by expanding NATO, but actually by doing the opposite of that.
Thank you, Deputy.
And saying we don't need militarisation. That is not the solution to these sorts of situations.
Minister.
Deputy, I just want to say that I don't accept your argument here that NATO is provoking a Russian military build-up on the borders of Ukraine. I don't think that that is an argument that is that stands up to scrutiny. Russia, there has been an ongoing military conflict on the borders of Ukraine for some time, and we have seen a dramatic increase in military presence on the Ukrainian border. In fact, on multiple elements now of the Ukrainian border coming from the Russian side. That is creating extraordinary tension, and NATO has responded to that tension. And we need to now focus on trying to diffuse it as best we can. And that is what Ireland has tried to bring to this debate. On the separate issue of the strategic compass that you raised earlier, we want to have as much coordination as is appropriate within the European Union to ensure that the EU can focus on its own security issues, but also can be an actor to support peace and security internationally, and that Ireland can be involved in that.
To conclude. Were you? Did I make a mistake?
Sorry?
Sorry, no, I thought I made a mistake. Go ahead.
Seriously, Minister, I mean, who are you kidding? NATO is not some sort of protective entity. Its rationale, if it ever had any, disappeared at the end of the Cold War. At the time, people like James Baker, who's the Secretary of State of the US, at the time said they wouldn't be an eastward expansion. Now, don't get me wrong, and I'll say it again today, I think Putin is a thug. He's dangerous. He's done horrendous things in Chechnya and Kazakhstan, and I must say the Western powers are far less concerned about those things. But the idea that NATO was some sort of benign, innocent force here, just responding, is ridiculous. They are actively recruiting states in the area and have expanded dramatically in that area, and at the same time are urging the European Union to increase military expenditure, which the European Union is going along with, as part of a broader militarisation project. And the neutral Ireland is not speaking out against it, and it should be. This state was born in opposition to empire building. And frankly, it's a betrayal of our tradition of opposition to imperialism and neutrality not to speak out loudly against both military political blocs and their militarist manoeuvrings.
Well, Deputy, we're not a member of NATO, and NATO can speak for itself on these issues. But if you speak to colleagues in other parts of Europe who are members of NATO, they will certainly give a very different perspective than you've just given in terms of their own protection and security into the future, given their historic relationship with other countries that they still regard as a potential threat. And Ireland is in the fortunate geographical position in the world where we don't feel threats externally from a conventional military attack in Ireland. That has allowed us to be militarily neutral. I think that is the position we should sustain and maintain, because I think it allows us to make interventions internationally that at times are helpful. But I think we need to focus less on name-calling here and more on trying to use a language of diffusing tension in the context of the pressure and tension that is building up between Russia and Ukraine, and indeed Russia and Europe and NATO.
Thank you, Minister.